This generation growing up with the internet, they have so much porn, they have to split it into categories.
Hi, I'm Carol Podell, and this is She Takes the Lead. Hi, everyone. It's Carol. I am so excited for today's episode because not only is it my first interview on She Takes the Lead, but I have a great guest, and I'm so jazzed to welcome him. His name is Adam Freeman. He is a multifaceted producer, writer, and director with over 25 years of experience in unscripted and scripted television. He did an 11-year stint at MTV, which culminated into over 1,000 hours of live TV. That's a lot, including Total Request Live, Direct Effect, and all of MTV's New Year's Eve and Wannabe VJ events. After that, he went on to be the youngest showrunner in syndication with the launch of On Air with Ryan Seacrest. He did shows with Nick Cannon and Chelsea Handler and followed that by directing over 160 episodes of Simmons Family Jewels, helping to turn that four-person production company into what is now known as Thinkfactory Media, an ITV company that produces some of the biggest brands on American television in non-scripted programming, including the hits Marriage Boot Camp and Mama June from Not to Hot, both of which Adam created. His critically acclaimed comic book, The Highwaymen, written with Marc Bernardin, is in development New Line, and now he has added yet another facet to his very, very, very extensive professional resume as a stand-up comic. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Adam Freeman. Hi, Adam.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm happy you're here.
Thank you.
So, first of all, I know you for a long time, but I would love it if you would tell everybody who's listening a little bit about yourself that I didn't mention in the intro.
Wow. Yeah. I was one of those lucky people that from very young age always knew what they wanted to do, or at least I knew the field. I always knew I wanted to work in movies or television from a young age. I think my first ambition was to be a stuntman. I thought getting into fake fights and blowing stuff up would be cool. But even though the role changed, like I just always knew that's what I wanted to do. So I always felt very kind of fortunate, when you're in high school and everyone's getting ready to graduate. So many of my friends had no idea what they wanted to study, what they wanted to do from a young age. And I was lucky enough that I had a dad that was really into photography and movies and music. So I had his Super 8 camera when I was younger. We had the first camcorder on the block, the first VHS camcorder. So I was always making movies and doing stuff like that. So went to school for film and writing. In my last semester, I got an internship because they told me that's what I had to do. So I got an internship at MTV, which turned into an 11-year job, and where I met my wife and really became what I consider kind of TV grad school, and then left to come to LA and just kept creating shows, producing shows. And I mean, as far as comedy goes, I've always been a comedy freak from when I was a little kid, listening to, Steve Martin and comedy albums on 8-track. I'm definitely dating myself, but always, yeah. So always loved stand-up comedy. Always wanted to do it, but was just too scared. In fact, in order for me to graduate, I had to either write, direct, or produce a one-act play as my senior thesis. And so I did a one-man show, and in the show, I played a comedian. So like as far back as then, it was something that I wanted to do, but I didn't really have the guts to do. And then about 5, 6 years ago now, it's still to this day the only New Year's resolution that I've ever kept. I think it was 2017 into 18. I was like, I'm going to do stand-up comedy this year, even if I just do it once and never do it again. I'm going to do it, so at least I can say I did it. And I did it, and it kind of took off a little faster than I thought. Not complaining at all, but I had a little bit of success early, and yeah, and it's just kind of took on a life of its own at this point.
Tell everybody where you are currently.
I am at the lovely Tropicana Hotel and Casino in Vegas, where I'm hosting an opening for a great comic named J. Chris Newberg all week at the Laugh Factory in Las Vegas. So I'm doing that this week on the road. And yeah, I'm having a blast. I mean, I can complain, but it's completely self-imposed, so I don't really have a right. You know, it's crazy, but no one's making me do it, so I'd sound like a jerk if I bitched about it. But yeah, so I jump between both worlds, but they've intersected too. It's good. Like I said, I created a show with Chelsea Handler. I produced 2 seasons of Nick Cannon's show. Last year, I created and sold and ran a pilot with Pete Holmes. Got to work with Natasha Leggero on a show that IEP called Rat in the Kitchen on TBS. So the comedy and my TV world are starting to intersect more and more, which is fun.
That's really cool. I mean, just to go back, obviously you've been schooled at it
Yeah.
by education and also by like life. From a creative perspective, figuring all of this out as you go, is there any like through line between them? What kind of got you there?
I have always been a creative person and had a burning desire to create things. Now, I am not equating that with whether the things I create are good or not. But what I mean by that is, from a young age, I was playing with clay. If we're sitting at the dinner table, I'm folding a little origami thing out of the napkin. Like I'm always making something, whether it's a doodle or whether it's a TV show. And I've always been the type of person that if I saw something and I liked it, I wanted to do it. You know what I mean? Like if I was a kid and I watched soccer and I liked soccer, watching it wasn't enough. I had to go play soccer. If I
You
saw,
always wanted to jump
I
into this.
yeah, I want. I don't know where it comes from, but I from an early age, there are plenty of people that love movies that don't have a burning desire to make movies.
Yes.
But from an early age, I was like, "Oh, I like that. I want to make that." And it's just for some reason those things have always been linked. Oh, I like music. I'm going to learn how to play the drums. Or I'm going to learn how to play guitar and play in bands, which I did and still do. Again, doesn't mean I'm good at it, but if I like something, for me, it's just natural to want to take part in the process of creating something in that world. And as a little kid, I was always drawing. I loved comic books, so I used to make my own comic books. Like just reading a comic book was cool, but it wasn't enough. So now, like you mentioned in my intro, I've been lucky enough to write and publish a bunch of comic books. Most of the comics I've written with my writing partner Marc Bernardin, who's been my oldest friend since fifth grade, and he's very successful in his own right, but we do a lot of stuff together.
What scares you about all of it? Because it's a scary universe. The universe that you're talking about is a big world.
It's weird, and I wasn't expecting a therapy session today. But no, I have. It's no, but it's true, and this is something that has served me very well, and also been a hindrance at times. I have, I think, a deep-seated fear of looking stupid, and that doesn't mean being laughed at, because as a comedian, you're laughed at all the time. But if I'm doing something, it's really important to me that it's good, especially if it's in the performance space. If it's playing music on stage or doing stand up on stage, like I want it to be good. You say you do it for yourself and you don't care what other people say. And maybe that's true for some, but I'd be lying if I said that.
I'm exactly the same way, but it moves me to move forward.
And especially with music and with stand-up comedy, we've all had friends that have done it. We've all gotten dragged to somebody's improv show or their band playing in some small bar, and they're just horrible. And it's like I never want to be that person that, like, oh dude, we got dragged to Adam's comedy show last week at the store. Like, oh my, like I just want it to be good, and it makes me feel good to be good. That can turn into a lot of pressure and standards that you'll never meet. But it's all, I'd say for the most part, it's served me well, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. So I talk a lot about like pivoting professionally, personally, a lot about change. It's kind of a big thing, especially I think in our vintage. Like once you kind of hit this age bracket, you've done a lot. Like you've lived a bit, no matter who you are, unless you've been literally in a bubble. You've lived a bit no matter what. What moved you through that and the changes that are happening? Has it felt like very fluid, or have you been like really conscious? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I know that the stand up was very consciously like, I want to stand up, but you've moved through in your career through several different things, and really just creating show after show after show is like a conscious decision on topics and on cast members. You did Gene Simmons Family Jewels for how many years?
like 7.
That's a long time. Once you're attached to that project, you are attached. So you have to be thinking, I assume, like the commitment that you're about to take upon.
Yeah, I mean, I've always really, whether it was right or wrong, taken ownership and taken the projects that I do very personally, you know. I wouldn't say that once I signed on the Family Jewels, like I was consciously at one time committing for a long time, because if I sucked at it, I would have been fired, or if I wanted to leave, I could have left. But once I'm in, like I'm in, no matter what it is. And I also tend a little less now that I'm older, but when I was younger, I really put blinders on. And for example, as being at MTV for 11 years, starting as a van driver and leaving as a showrunner, it was invaluable, and I don't regret it for a second. Like I said, I met my wife there, but they work you hard, especially back then. Now I think like even PAs get overtime and stuff. Like they worked us hard and long, and it was pretty insane. And that trained me, for better or for worse, to like put my head down, have blinders on, and like move forward. And for 11 years working there, it became kind of like my identity in a way, because the job is all consuming. And my wife says the same thing.
Mm.
Looking back at like our 20s, we don't look back and go, remember in 1995 we did this? Like 1995 to me means the MTV Beach House in Malibu. Like that's what I think of. You know what I mean? I think of it in terms of tentpole projects, you know? Oh, 99. Oh yeah, that was when I
Yeah.
produced New Year's Eve from 99 to 2000. We were in Times Square. And even then, with doing Gene Simmons for 7 years, like I think of years, and I think of like, oh yeah, that's when we were in Europe, or that's when we went to Singapore, or that's when we did this, or we went to Israel and met his long lost family, things like that. Like, you know what I mean? So it kind of all becomes intertwined and meshed, which serves the work really well. It doesn't always serve the personal well, because you get kind of lost in it. But it's just the way I know it's just the way I've always been. I've been trying. I say the last couple of years, I've definitely finally been better at like boundaries. But
I wanted to just clarify, just for the Gen Z, millennials generation, when Adam was working at MTV, MTV was the cutting edge. There was nothing else like MTV. It was like that time in MTV literally created a format of
yeah, you
television on
can't.
its own. That was like the job, the place that you wanted to be if you were the cool young kid.
Yeah, it's very hard to like convey nowadays, like what a cultural force it was, pre-internet, pre-everything. It was the place that told you what was cool. It was the place that you had to go to see your favorite artists, to hear your favorite music. It was where you got your entertainment news from. It was where you got your socially conscious news from. It was where you figured out who you wanted to vote for. It was like the hub of a generation, and that just doesn't exist anymore.
Okay, so you kind of wanted to do comedy the whole time, but what was stopping you?
It was twofold. It was, I love it so much that I made it too precious in my mind, meaning that I had so much admiration and reverence for it. In my head, it became something that other people could do that I could never possibly do, if that makes any sense. And at the same time, in my TV life, I was in small ways scratching that itch by writing for Chelsea and doing these kind of things. So I had my toe in that world, and I was writing for other comedians, and I just looked at it as like, well, I could never do that. It's the same. It's the same in at least for me, like in music. Like I'll listen to a piece of music, and it's just like, oh my God, like how did that person conjure that piece of music? And I can't even fathom it. And then you sit down to learn it, and you're like, oh, well, it's really just F minor to C, that like I never could have written that, but like all of a sudden it demystifies it, and you're like, no, it's the same chords as these other songs. Now I don't know why when they do it, it's so magical and everything, and I couldn't create that, but like, oh wow, this is what it is. Like all of a sudden you're playing it, and it is something that theoretically another human besides that person could do.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think that's what kept me away for so long, was I just was like, oh, I could never do that. Like those are magical people with special abilities. And they are, but it doesn't mean that somebody else can't try it.
I mean, I've had the same experience, right? I mean, I turn them into very precious little gems,
Right.
and therefore they are not attainable to me. They are attainable to every other person on the planet somehow, or at least every other person that I know, including peers, people I was educated with,
Yeah.
people I was in business with, whatever. Somehow it's not mine. So I now have,
Right.
finally figured this out for myself and just throw myself. I have an idea, probably now a little to the extreme on the other side, where I'm like, I want
Yeah.
to do something, I want to try it, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to precious. And if it sucks, it sucks. And I'll go back to square one. And, and if I'm onto something, then I'll try to keep going, or maybe I don't like it.
Right. Right.
I ran the marathon in 2011. Big deal, right? Like a big deal. Never ran anything, never raced anything. I practiced yoga for many, many years, and I bought some book that was like running for yogis and read it and basically
Right.
turned running into a yoga practice. I am the slowest runner on the planet.
Well, you started in 2011. You never mentioned when you finished.
That's fair. It was like slightly past January of 2012.
Yeah.
But the result was, which I found hilarious, was you think you've done this kind of amazing thing, but a lot, and it was lovely as a response, but it was very funny. A lot of the people who responded to it, you know what? I'm going to do it. If Carol can do it, I can do it. Am I the idiot who's like, well, if Carol can do it, it can't be that hard?
Right.
Am I the inspiration? And I always think that's, like, I'm happy
Yeah.
to have inspired anybody to do anything. Like, I don't care how it happened. And the next year, multiple
Well,
people ran the
yeah,
New York
it's
City
like
Marathon
you
as a
you
result.
made it relatable to them because to them you're just their friend Carol, their coworker Carol, their cousin Carol. Yeah, I mean, I've
Who's your Carol?
it's weird. I've been a Carol to a few people. I have a friend from MTV that I lost touch with for several years, and then he came to see me at the Comedy Store and was like, I always wanted to try stand up, and I was like, go and do it. And he took a class, and I went to see him perform. And I don't say I've inspired them like my art, whatever, but like they same kind of thing. They were like, wow, a guy later in life like decided to do this thing. Yeah, that's kind of cool. It's weird, and it sounds in this like rah world that we live in. It sounds petty, but if I look back on my life and my career, I've been more driven by negative experiences than positive ones. If like I read even back in school, like you see these social media clips or you see celebrities on talk shows and they talk about that professor that inspired them and and oh my, and he or she made it possible, and I was more driven by the professor that gave me a C on a one act play I wrote. She said she loved it, but it was so good there's no way I could have written it, and she would have failed me if she just knew where I plagiarized it from.
Shut the front door.
That drove me more than a professor going, good job, here's an A. I've been in awe of amazing comics, but when I've worked with comics that were so and they implied that I couldn't do it, that's the quickest way to be like, fuck you, I'm doing it. And that's just because I'm stubborn that way. Yeah, I guess I'm more driven by the yeah, by the negative than the positive. I don't know. It's.
I think that's a thing, though. I mean, I think that's like, yeah, you're right. You hear people that are like, oh, I was so inspired by blah, blah, blah. Like, if you talk to most people, they're not learning big lessons from sitting at home eating marshmallows. They're learning the big lessons because,
Right.
well, shitty metaphor, they ran out of marshmallows and now they have
Right.
to eat cucumbers, like, clearly I'm on a diet. So, but yeah, no, I think it's like that's the tail of it. One of the things I'm kind of into lately is the secrets of it, not the secrets like of how to do it, but the
Right.
secrets that nobody talks about. Whether that's when I got divorced, all of a sudden there were like 1,000 people that were like, either I'm getting divorced, I
Right.
hate my spouse, I want a divorce. Nobody says anything before. Same thing when I started on fertility to have my kid. Everybody's like, oh, it took us, this long. Oh, we're trying to do this. Yeah, that's what split us up, blah, 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 blah. Like, nobody
Right.
talks about it beforehand. They only talk about it after the fact. And if they're getting accolades, it's
Yeah.
like, all they do is you just hear the good stories. I mean, that's the social media anyways, that you're only seeing the good stuff, and you're seeing the
Right.
result of hard work, hopefully.
Well, I've also found too, it's funny that I think when it's a creative pursuit, and this might come out sounding wrong, but a lot of people think that they can do it. And a lot of people can, but a lot of people think they can, and they have no trouble letting you know that they think that they can.
Right. Like, oh, I have a script idea. I'm sitting poolside in a weekend. And
Yeah, like Bryan Cranston, he played a paraplegic in that movie. Like I could sit in a wheelchair and play that part. Like it's funny because when I was just known amongst my circle of people, or I was introduced to friends as like, oh, this is Adam. He does TV or he does reality TV. Like everybody at a party was pitching me their reality show. You know,
I think I did too.
you probably did. But it would be anything from like, oh, it's crazy down at my work. You should do a show about that.
Yeah.
I have a reality show for you. And they would tell me, oh, my cousin's crazy garbage man. You should do a show on garbage man or whatever it was. And now that's switched to like, oh, I have something you can put in one of your skits. And everyone's pitching me jokes at, everywhere I go. I got a joke for you.
What's your worst suggestion?
They're usually really offensive because they think that their shocking opinion is like original.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it'll usually be like, what you should do is you should do a joke about how all gay people blah blah blah. And I'm like, A, that's not even a premise, and B, I wouldn't say that out loud. Yeah, but nobody ever walks up to a lawyer and says, like, oh, let me come down to your work and defend that person next week. I know I can do that. Like, like, hey, can I do that appendectomy next week for you? I've always wanted to be a surgeon, you know? And I think what it is especially in the creative field, but in any field, people that are really good at it make it look easy. And that gives the layperson the impression, like I've had people say like, oh, I've always wanted to do stand-up comedy and I've always wanted to do this, and then they ask me a question like, so when you get up there, like, how do you know what you're going to say? And I'm like, so they don't even know the process. Like they think that you're just getting up there and just the first thing that pops into your mouth. And I'm like, okay, then that's because they probably saw someone that was so natural and so conversational that it just made them think, wow, they're just a naturally funny person and they're getting up on stage. Um,
Right. Or they've seen Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, and that's the only reference they
yeah,
have
that
to
it
a.
just came out of her head fully
Yeah.
formed, or they saw Ray or the Bob Marley movie or something where someone goes, no, it goes like this, and then five people come in with three-part harmonies. Yeah, that's it, and
Right.
that's it, and what I say is written in 15 seconds. Like, great, um,
Right.
yeah, because it's people that are good at anything, they can make it look, effortless.
I also think that maybe that it's people have an insight because they're seeing it, they're experiencing it with you in that kind of creative endeavor. Like, I don't know what an appendectomy looks like, and I don't want to. And I mean, fortunately, I've never been in a situation where I needed a litigator.
Yeah, I think it's yeah, it's also being there and people get caught up, and it's also people's egos. And it's very interesting, like in stand up, with like, I see this every once in a while where I'll be on stage or someone else will be on stage and I'm looking at the crowd, and like a woman is in the crowd really laughing and enjoying herself, and I see the guy she's with getting pissed, like another peacock has come along and is like she's deriving joy from someone besides the guy that she came with. And I see it a lot.
That's awesome.
um yeah, and those are lots of times the guys that end up like heckling, and because they think they're going to make the show better. They can't they It's the narcissism of like
Right.
somebody in the room has a spotlight on them besides me. Yeah, it's
Right.
how do I
How do you deal with the hecklers? I mean, in that situation, like those hecklers. I don't mean all. I mean, I'm sure that probably
No,
all
no,
hecklers are the same,
there's
maybe.
different
But
there's different types. I've been very lucky in that I haven't experienced too many of like the mean-spirited hecklers of like, you suck or get off the stage. It's usually it's usually people that are having a good time, that have been a little overserved and don't realize that it's not a conversation, it's a performance. So a lot of the heckling that I get is more like, "Oh, my mom does that," or like, "Oh my God, what about?" Or I'll ask a rhetorical question, but they answer it, because which part of me takes as a little bit of a compliment because it means I've made some connection or I've said something relatable to them on some level that they feel they can just talk back to me. Then there are others that are just drunk. Last night there were these two douchebags sitting down front that were these two, I say kids, they're probably in their mid 20s, that were talking to each other really loudly, and they were trying to like guess the punchline of the joke before me or the headliner like said the joke. And so those guys were just being,
Ay, ay,
dicks.
ay.
Other times it's just people that have, it's mostly alcohol involved, and they're either using their outside voice inside, or they think it's a conversation. but
Right.
but with hecklers, I found, at least, I think everybody's different, you kind of have to match their energy or match the energy to the room. Like in the beginning, I was so fearful of having to deal with a heckler that when someone was a little disruptive, whether it was meaning to be disruptive or inadvertently, I went at them like hard. And you you'll like,
What does
hey,
that
like,
mean?
whatever, shut the fuck up, or what, whatever it is, like. And you can feel, as a comic, you can feel a room turn on you. So you kind of have to like match their energy. Like if they're being an asshole, that gives you permission to be an asshole. If they're being nice but still disruptive, but that you could tell they mean well, they're just being friendly, you have to kind of like quiet them down, or make them feel like they're being heard, but also let them know like this is not the time or the place. Or like, like the first time it ever happened to me, this woman just started, she was in the front, and she just started talking to me. Like she just was just like, yeah, well, this one time my aunt, whatever, whatever. And I was like, really? Okay. I was like, well, I'm working now. Can we talk after? And it got a laugh, and it made her embarrassed just enough that it put her in her place. But I didn't, but it wasn't like I was going, shut the fuck up, I'm trying to perform here. Every situation's different. And that's what I love about stand up. And, and I know, and you come from theater and stuff, it's the same thing. It's like when you're doing anything in front of a live audience, the physical chemistry of the people in that audience, that combination will never occur again. you know the makeup of those 100 people, those 10 people, those 500 people, those exact people in that state of mind, that she had a shitty day at work, they just got engaged, I'm out for my birthday, I just found out I have cancer, whatever the hell every individual person is going through, they make up a collective. Everybody brings their own shit into the audience, and then that audience takes on a personality. And that's what makes stand up um so interesting, is that you can tell the same joke to five different crowds and get five totally different reactions. And you have to be able to react. You have to be able to, I've never been one of those comedians, well, not never, but very, very few times ever have I not done well and blamed the room for not doing well. You'll see comics come off stage and you're like, oh, that crowd's dead, or they're a bunch of assholes, whatever. I never say that out loud. Earlier in my career, I thought it once or twice, and almost every time I thought it, somebody went up after me and murdered. And I go, okay, see, it wasn't them. Like that comedian connected to them in a way that I couldn't. Well, yeah, I have to accept the fact that I can't say that crowd sucks when somebody goes up after me and just kills. So so I always look at it as like,
You could say it yourself, but you choose not to. I mean, that's the thing.
yeah, but that's what, there've been very few times that I've that I've walked away from a show going, okay, that show didn't go well, and it was that audience. 99% of the time, I because I internalize everything, and like I said before, the pressure I put on myself to do well, I think, like, you know, I also look at everything, and this sounds so new agey, and it's not real, like, but like I do look at everything as a learning experience, kind of, in that I'm always looking to get better, and this comes back to just the reverence that I have for stand-up comedy. Like when I lately. the last year or so, I've been lucky enough in that the shows I've been doing have been starting to be a little bigger, a little more high profile, a little, with comics that are a little more established. And I love I love being the only face on the poster that people like have no idea who I am, because it means it's kind of like a basketball player going like, I want to play with the best players. You know what I mean? And it's like, and
Yeah.
so when I'm at the Comedy Store, or like, I did a show once, and it was Nikki Glazer, it was Jeff Ross, it was Sebastian, it was somebody else. And like, for me, it was like,
That's
and
a
I'm not
lineup.
saying that to be like, well, I was with them. Somehow, like, I, the God signed on me, and somebody asked me to do this show, and I literally, like, I didn't have a notebook out because I don't want people to think I was stealing their material, but my brain was on record the entire time, not for material, but like, oh my God, look how he did that. Oh, you see what she did there? That was, like, it's just, it's like anything. It's, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I love, and I love progress. I love, like, I'll give you a perfect example. Like, there's this bit that I do, and I won't go into the bit, but it was one of the first bits that I ever wrote that like did well, right? And amongst my friends and like my wife's friends that like would come and see me, they were always quoting it back to me, and they had hats made with like it on as a joke and to be supportive and stuff. And so now that I'm getting, you know, I've gotten, I have a million levels to go, but I've notched up one, I leveled up one little level, and I can now sell or try to sell merch. Usually you want your merch to be like something from your act, right? So I made these stickers that like play into the bit. And I've been doing this bit on and off for 5 years now. Like, it comes in and out of my act. And I came to Vegas, and I found all these stickers that like I never sold, and I was like, all right, I'll bring the stickers with me. I'm gonna have to do that bit, which I haven't done in a while, because it makes no sense to sell these stickers if I don't do the bit. And I did the bit on stage last night, and on the fly, I changed something, and I restructured something, and it was the first time in 5 years that I've ever done the bit any different than I did it in 5 years, and it got the biggest reaction that I've ever gotten. And what that taught me, it wasn't like a pat on the back, but it was like, so after 5 years of doing something that was probably like a B plus, like, all it took was a couple of words, and now maybe it's an A minus. You know what I mean? And for me, those are
Yeah.
like the
Yeah.
victories, that like the personal little victories that I get excited about. It's I equate it to
Yeah.
like when I was in high school, I took guitar lessons, and I had this crappy Hondo acoustic guitar, right? And I remember playing it, and like 6 months in, I remember saying to my guitar teacher, like, this thing just keeps going out of tune. And he was like, no, it's always been that way. I'm like, no, it's going out of tune. He goes, no, your ears are getting better. You can tell when it's out of tune now. He's like, you
Oh,
didn't know it was
wow.
always
So
out of tune. You didn't know when it was out of tune. So it was like, it's like little victories like that just nobody in the crowd knows. They never heard the bit before. They didn't know I did anything different. They didn't know a thing. But I got back to this room last night after the show, and I was like, oh, that was pretty cool. Like, I wouldn't have been able, I cracked something that I couldn't have cracked a year ago or 6 months ago or 2 years ago. You know what I mean?
right, because you've been doing it and learning and growing as you're going, right?
Yeah, and I did, and so as long as I keep seeing those little baby steps, like, those are the things I get excited about.
So are you, when you're doing this, like are you writing out the jokes? Are you writing out a premise and then talking it through? Because I feel like in anything, right, when you're preparing, whether that's to do this, whether that's to go to an interview into a job you've never had before, whether that's you're walking into a date, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Everybody has kind of their way of figuring out how they're going to function or shift or whatever. Like, what's your, were you writing these in your mind, or you just, I mean, I've known you for years, decades, really. We won't say how many, but you're hilarious. Like, you're a funny guy. So like, it wasn't like, wait, Adam is getting into stand up? That's not okay. Let's see how that goes. And then you're like, killing it. But
Yeah, it's, and every person's process is different. For me, because I was a writer long before I performed, and this was something that I actually had to overcome. But I, again, was very precious, and I write out. I always write out everything meticulously, because to me the flow of words, like I was saying last night, is a perfect example. Like, I took two sentences and went like this, and changed a verb, and the jokes and the laughs exponentially went up like 30%. So, someone that is very meticulous about the way things are worded, or the rhythm of something, and everything. Now, on the flip side of that, I think if you looked at the first few years I did stand up as opposed to now, it would probably look like I was reciting a monologue rather than performing stand up, because I was so slaven to
Right.
the word that I literally was like doing a monologue. And that's not the way to connect
Right.
to people. So what it becomes now is, and and I'm not an actor, but you could probably speak to this. It's like knowing it so backwards and forwards that I don't have to think about what the next word is. And it changes a little bit here and there, but it's
Yeah.
still 90% of what I wrote down. But I'm focused on being natural and selling the concept and connecting with the audience, not, oh my God, what's the next sentence? What's the next, did I say the wrong preposition or
Right.
something? You know what I mean? So I write down stuff. I mean, I know comics that, like, they literally just, they'll just write down dogs and they know what that means. I can't do that. And I don't know if I'll ever get to the stage. I don't know whether that's an experience thing or I'll get to the point where I can do that. But
You want to do that.
I'm funny in converse. Like, there are some comedians that, and this is not to take away from their talent at all, but there are comedians that they come on stage, and just based on either the way they look or the way they carry themselves or their speech pattern, like, they're already funny before they've even like told jokes. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I'm not that type of person. I walk up on stage and everyone's like, "Okay, what's this guy about?" And I really rely on the that written word, but now I have to, like I said, get past that. And but when I write a bit for the first time, I'm still always writing and rewriting and tweaking. And then sometimes on stage it changes, and sometimes it changes for the good, sometimes it doesn't. But and then I just have notes in my phone where I'm just always jotting down like little things.
Do you have a lot of material? You're sort of like, is your thing to sort of hone the material you have, or is it like you have a lot of different material and you're sort of like, I'm choosing this piece right now, or like, what's your?
When I first started, because it was all so brand new and it was all so exciting and everything, I was I was writing like a fiend. And and I was just saying to my buddy last night, like, just the last couple of months, just life getting in the way, like, since the fall I have not been writing as much as I should. But what I have been doing is, like, that bit last night is a perfect example, is like going back and looking at things that I wrote that were totally acceptable to me at the time because it was the best that I can do. But now, a few years in, oh, that's a C plus. Like, I bet I can make that a B plus now.
Yeah.
Because back then, and the other thing too is like, and I didn't realize this because I'm not on the road 24/7. I'm not shooting Netflix specials and stuff, but like, I was, I'm a big fan of Pete Holmes.
I love.
He's great. And I did a pilot with him last year, and I remember hearing him say about one of his specials, he said, "I think it was really good, but if I could have run that piece like another 100 times, I would have cracked it." And to me,
Wow.
like, because I get bored of myself so easily, I was like, another 100 times, like, and that's when I realized that when you're on the road, when you're a successful comedian, you're on the road, and you're like here in Vegas, like, I'm playing to 100% brand new people every night, right? So whatever I say is new
Right.
to them. When I'm back in LA, I'm part of a community. And I think what I ended up, I
Oh.
don't do it as much as I used to, but what I did in the very beginning was I became more concerned about entertaining that community than the audience. And what I mean by that is I'd look, I go, okay, well, I go like, okay, where am I tonight? Oh, I'm on a show with Carol. You know what? I've done like 15 shows with Carol this year, and she's heard this bit and she's heard this. And it was like when I shouldn't give a fuck if Carol the comedian, I should, So I think I was in when I started, I was turning over material too fast. I think that I think that
I see.
I had a lot of C plus B bits that may have been like A premises, but I either didn't have the skill at the time or I didn't do them enough to fully flesh them out because the new shiny thing that I thought of, you know what I mean? It's like being in a band and always playing a couple new songs every set when it's like, well, the bridge on that song you wrote last week still needs some work.
Right.
So I'm not writing as much as I am, but I feel like the stuff that I'm honing and I am writing is more well thought out when I do it, if that makes any sense.
It totally makes sense. And it's funny because I was thinking, when I was sort of prepping and figuring out what I wanted to ask you, because also I've known you for a long time. So I didn't want it to be like, oh, well, tell me. Blah, blah, blah. But one of the things that I always thought was kind of wild, especially, I mean, when I was in TV, but when we got to spend some time together, when I was also living in Los Angeles, was you were like insane. Like you have an incredible knowledge of pop culture, like I've never seen. And you're funny. So, like, the combo was like, I know what's funny, but you when you're doing TV, you also have
Yeah.
to know what your audience wants, right? And you seem to marry those two really, really well in that universe. I mean,
Yeah.
it's from out here, I mean, it seemed like you kind of got what is happening and what's funny and what works, because that's not always like what works and what the audience wants to see, especially with reality.
Yeah, I mean, but it's like anything. Like if you look at my IMDb page, I think I have like 170 shows on there. But you'll recognize
Gosh.
5 of them. Like I've done a lot that didn't work.
Right.
I've done a lot of shows. The Hookup with Andrew Schultz. You've never heard of that. Preacher's Daughters. You've never heard of that. You've never heard of Mounted in Alaska. You've never heard of Big Giant Swords. I've done a million shows that you've never heard of. I've been lucky enough that there's a couple on there. Tiro, Ryan Seacrest, Gene Simmons. There's a few on there that you're like, oh, I recognize those. But there's the percentage of those versus the ones you've never heard. So, it's I use this quote all the time, and I never thought that I would be quoting Ben Affleck, but but
He's a smart guy.
he said something in an interview a couple months ago that I really really took to heart, and he talked about when he and Matt Damon were writing Good Will Hunting. He said early on, I said to Matt, don't judge me by my bad ideas, judge me by my good ideas. And that to me was really like really registered with me, because if you're a creative person,
Wow.
especially in TV, in comedy, like it sounds very unromantic, but at a certain point it is a numbers game. Like you have to throw a lot of stuff against the wall to see what sticks. And if nothing sticks, okay, if one thing out of a million sticks, well, you got one good idea of it, and it's one good idea than somebody else had. So I'm flattered that you say that, but from a distance it always looks more than it is. For every show, you mentioned earlier, like, well, now you're creating TV shows. I would say I probably sell one out of every 30 shows that I pitch. And out of those one out of every 30 that I pitch, one out of those 30 actually makes it to air. You know what I mean? So it's very easy to see the successes, but there's way, way more failures. And the same thing with stand up.
Yeah.
The jokes that I've done on stage, that the bits that never worked outweigh the think about baseball. It's like if you hit the ball, 1/3 of the time, you're the leading batter in the league. You know, so it becomes
Right.
you know it
Right. Right.
becomes numbers. In the beginning, when I started, it was tough because I came to comedy late. So when I was starting at the very bottom and I was doing open mics in bars and things like that, almost all the other comedians were 20 years younger than me, and the crowds were 20 years younger than me because they were just the friends that came to see, their comedian friends. So the stuff that I was writing about, that was my world, that was relatable, kids, marriage, these audiences just couldn't. You can't tell a 20-year-old that's that's having multiple threesomes a night, that when after you're married for 24 years, your sex slows down. They're like, what are you talking about? I can have sex whenever I want. They can't relate to that. They can't relate to parenting. So I would do these shows and I would just bomb because it was just going like over their heads. And then, but at the same time, when I got to perform for crowds that were a little more mature, had lived a little more, it registered quickly. And what a comedian that is much more accomplished than me, what a compliment he paid me early on is, most comedians start 10 years before they have anything to write about, and you started after you already
Wow.
lived. Now, whether it's funny or not is a whole other scale, but I when I got on stage and I talked about stuff, I had lived life, and I had, like, if you ever watch one, it was Raw or Delirious from Eddie Murphy, and he's talking about, like, the first bit he ever did was like, don't you hate it when you flush the toilet and that one chunk comes back up? Like, he's like, I knew my only experience was pooping. Like,
Right.
I hadn't lived.
Right.
Whereas when I right from the get go, when I started, I was doing bits about being married and kids and working and buying a house and things like that. And so that's it served me really well. And I think that's one of the reasons that in the very beginning I moved up a little quicker, because once I got the opportunity to be in front of crowds that could and on any level relate to that stuff, um, it just, it endeared me to them. And it also, after months and months and months of performing to 20-year-olds that wasn't laughing, to finally get laughs, be like, oh, okay, maybe I am funny. Because in the beginning, you don't know. You're like, am I funny? Am I not funny? Is it the crowd? Is it not the crowd? Like, you have no idea. Um, so,
Right.
as far as now knowing what people want, I think it's just talking about relatable stuff to our age group, or making stuff relatable to our age group relatable to a younger crowd also. Or like, well, like, I have a bit I do about porn, and about how this generation growing up with the internet, like, they have so much porn, they have to split it into categories. And and when I was a kid, we had one genre of porn. It was called porn, and that's all it was. It was a waterlogged Playboy in the woods that some older kid buried, and that's what it was. It wasn't going
That's
through
right.
menus of Asian stepmom, Asian stepmom facial. Like, well, what the holy shit? So that's something that I can joke about, that the people in the crowd our age, they laugh because they remember stealing their dad's Playboy or their mom's Playgirl or whatever, and young kids can laugh because it's an old fuck talking about, you know, print magazines and making fun of the shit that they're into. You know what I mean? Um,
Right.
so it's
Yeah.
finding that common ground, but having a perspective. And I think, if anything, if there's lots of negatives to coming to comedy as late as I did, if there's any positives, it's that I was a little more full formed as far as, like, my voice, if that doesn't sound too pretentious.
No, no. I mean, I think that's amazing. Also, I think that like you can put that to anything, right? Like you can I think you can put that if you're trying to like move into another industry, or you're trying to learn even a hobby, it doesn't really matter, but if you're trying to learn something like at a later age in life, but at a later age in life, you're like I used to do something that did never served me when I was younger, which was to I would go into a situation and be like, I'm just going to be neutral. I'm not bringing myself just so I can learn and focus. And it never served me. I didn't even
Yeah,
realize it, but it never served me because I wasn't actually bringing my own experience. And every time I started, I was starting at square
right.
one. And at a point, like, no, don't start at square one. Like, start where you're starting. When people are trying to make changes in their lives, it's like, well, now I have to learn this whole new thing. Well, no, you're bringing a whole
Yeah,
life of
it's
whatever you were doing
a
before.
lot of the process of learning, the process of troubleshooting, of being solution oriented, that crosses over anything that you're learning.
So, what do you have going on, Adam? Is there anything like you want to mention, promote? I want to hear.
In June, my next comic book with Marc Bernardin will be on the stands. It's called Census, and it comes from Comixology and Amazon Originals. And then the weekend of April 19th and 20th, I'll be at the Grand Comedy Club outside of San Diego. I think it's Escondido, it's considered. And I'll be performing there for the weekend. And then otherwise, look me up on social media at Mr. Adam Freeman on almost everything.
Hey, thanks so much for listening. If you like what you heard, please hit subscribe. Also, if you want to keep in touch, go to Insta at About a Blonde or Facebook at About a Blonde Official. Also, you can sign up for my mailing list at www.aboutablonde.com. Have a great day. Mwah!